I never imagined I'd find myself pouring out my heart to strangers, but here I am. Call me what you will, but I needed to get this off my chest. It's about my wife, or rather, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and how one New Year's Eve turned my entire life upside down. It all started when my wife, Emily, told me she was going to a New Year's party with her friends. Normally, I'd be right there with her, but this year she insisted it was a girls-only thing. I didn't think much of it at the time. I trusted her. She had never given me a reason not to. We'd been married for 6 years, and while we had our ups and downs, I always believed we had something real. So I stayed home. I figured I'd order some takeout, watch the ball drop on TV, and maybe call it an early night. Emily left around 8 p.m., dressed to the nines in a sparkly dress that hugged her figure in all the right places. She kissed me goodbye and told me not to wait up. "Don't stay up too late," she said with a wink. "I might crash at Sarah's if it gets too late." That should have been my first red flag, but I ignored it. Sarah was her best friend, and I figured Emily would be safer there than driving home in the middle of the night after a few drinks. Midnight rolled around, and I texted her, "Happy New Year." She didn't reply. Again, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was busy partying or didn't hear her phone. I went to bed, assuming I'd hear from her in the morning. But when 3 a.m. came and she still wasn't home, I started to worry. I texted again, "Hey, everything okay?" No reply. I called her, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when the anxiety started creeping in. Around 4:30 a.m., I heard the sound of the front door creaking open. I got out of bed and walked into the living room. And there she was, stumbling through the door, her heels in one hand and her purse in the other. Her makeup was smeared, and her hair looked like it had been through a tornado. "Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked at me, her eyes glassy and unfocused. "Hey, babe," she slurred. "Didn't mean to wake you." I stepped closer, and that's when I saw it. A dark, purplish hickey on the side of her neck. My stomach dropped. "What is that?" I asked, pointing at her neck. She blinked, clearly confused. "What's what?" "That?" I gestured again, my voice trembling now. "On your neck." Emily's hand flew to her neck as if she'd just realized it was there. "Oh, that?" she said, trying to laugh it off. "It's nothing, just... I bumped into something." "Bumped into something?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Emily, that's a hickey. Who gave you that?" She froze, her face going pale despite the blush still on her cheeks. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she tried to laugh again, but it sounded forced. "Oh, come on, you're being ridiculous." "It's nothing, really." But I wasn't buying it. I pressed her for answers, but she kept dodging the question. Finally, she stormed off to the bedroom, muttering something about me being paranoid and ruining her night. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Who was she with? What really happened at that party? And why did she think she could brush it off like it was no big deal? By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to stick around and play the fool. If she couldn't respect me enough to be honest, then I wasn't going to waste any more of my time. When she woke up around noon, still hung over and grumpy, I told her I was going out for a bit. She barely acknowledged me, mumbling something about needing coffee. But I didn't just go out. I packed a bag, grabbed my car keys, and drove away without looking back. I didn't leave a note or tell her where I was going. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the confusion and betrayal I felt. And that's where this story really begins, because disappearing wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. When I drove away that morning, I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house another second. I needed space to think, to process what I'd seen and heard, or more accurately, what I hadn't heard. Emily's refusal to come clean was like a knife twisting in my chest, and I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her to tell me more lies. I drove for hours, aimlessly. The city streets blurred into highways, and soon I found myself in the middle of nowhere. At some point, I stopped at a roadside diner, one of those places with neon signs and peeling paint. I ordered a cup of coffee and sat in the corner, staring out the window at the empty parking lot. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I knew it was Emily, probably wondering where I'd gone. She could wonder all she wanted. For once, I was the one in control. By the time the waitress refilled my coffee for the third time, I realized I needed a plan. Disappearing was one thing, but I couldn't just live out of my car forever. I opened my phone, bracing myself for the flood of messages. Sure enough, there were a dozen texts from Emily. Where are you? Are you okay? This isn't funny. Come home. The last one hit harder than I expected. Please, let's talk. I'm sorry. Sorry. That word used to mean something to me, but now it felt hollow. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd gotten caught. I closed the messages without replying and started scrolling through listings for motels. Eventually, I found a cheap place a few towns over. It wasn't glamorous, peeling wallpaper, a bed that creaked if you so much as breathed, but it was enough. That first night away was surreal. I lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling and replaying the events of the past 24 hours over and over in my head. The Hickey, her slurred excuses, the way she stormed off instead of owning up to her actions. It all felt like a bad dream. But the worst part was the gnawing uncertainty. Who had she been with? How long had this been going on? And what was I supposed to do now? The next morning, I decided to take action. If Emily wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. I started by calling Sarah, her best friend. If anyone knew what really happened at that New Year's party, it would be her. Hey, Sarah, I said when she picked up, it's me, Mike. I need to ask you something about the party Emily went to. There was a long pause on the other end. Mike, I don't think I'm the right person to talk to about this. Come on, Sarah, I pressed. I just need to know if she was with someone. Please. Another pause, then a sigh. Look, I don't want to get in the middle of this, but yeah, she left the party with someone. A guy. I don't know his name, but they were close. My stomach churned. How close? Close enough that people noticed, she said quietly. I'm sorry, Mike, I really am. I thanked her and hung up, my hands shaking. So it was true. Emily hadn't just gone to a party with her friends. She left with another man. And judging by the hickey on her neck, they'd done more than just talk. For the rest of the day, I tried to keep myself busy. I went for a walk, grabbed some food, and even tried to read a book. But no matter what I did, my mind kept circling back to Emily and the betrayal. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them sitting in that motel room. I decided to drive back home, not to stay, but to confront her. If she wanted to save our marriage, she needed to come clean. And if not, well, I wasn't sure what would happen, but I knew I couldn't move forward without the truth. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. For a moment, I thought she wasn't home, but then I saw her car parked in the garage and a faint light coming from the living room window. I took a deep breath and walked inside. Emily was sitting on the couch, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. When she saw me, her eyes widened in relief. Mike, thank God you're okay. Where have you been? I didn't answer. Instead, I sat down across from her and looked her straight in the eye. We need to talk. She nodded, biting her lip. I know. I screwed up. Who was he? I asked, my voice cold and steady. Her face turned white. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Emily. I know you left the party with another man. Sarah told me. So who was he? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her eyes darting around the room like she was looking for an escape. It's not what you think, she finally said. Just a friend. I was drunk, and don't. I snapped, cutting her off. Don't insult my intelligence. You had a hickey on your neck, Emily. Friends don't give each other hickeys. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I waited, giving her one last chance to come clean. But instead of the truth, she started sobbing, muttering something about how she didn't mean for this to happen. That was the moment I realized she wasn't going to tell me anything. Whatever had happened that night, she was determined to keep it a secret. And if she couldn't be honest with me, then there was no point in staying. I'm done, Emily, I said, standing up. I don't know where I'm going, but I can't stay here anymore. Not with you. Mike, wait, she cried, reaching for me, but I pulled away. No, I said firmly. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I walked out the door, leaving her sobbing on the couch. As I got into my car and drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, and a sense of relief. For the first time in days, I felt like I was taking control of my life. But little did I know, this was only the beginning of a much darker chapter. I didn't drive far that night. I found another cheap motel a few towns over and checked in, too exhausted to think clearly. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of truth I had uncovered. Emily had lied to me, betrayed me, and yet I still felt this gnawing sense of guilt for leaving her sobbing in that living room. Maybe I was too soft, Or maybe after 6 years of marriage, I just couldn't believe this was happening. The next morning, I woke up to a string of missed calls and texts from Emily. They ranged from pleading apologies to angry accusations, like she was trying every trick in the book to get me to respond. I ignored them all. Instead, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, my old college buddy, Ryan. Ryan was one of those guys who always seemed to know what to do, no matter how messy the situation. We hadn't kept in touch much after I got married, but I knew he'd have my back. When I explained everything that had happened, he didn't hesitate. "Mike, you can't let her manipulate you," he said. "If she's hiding something, you need to find out what it is. And I think I know how we can do that." Ryan suggested hiring a private investigator. At first, the idea sounded extreme, something out of a movie, not real life. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Emily wasn't going to tell me the truth, and I couldn't move forward without knowing. So I agreed. Within hours, Ryan had connected me with someone, a guy named Chris, who specialized in uncovering infidelity. We met at a coffee shop, where I laid everything out for him: the party, the Hickey, the lies. Chris listened carefully, taking notes on a small pad. "I'll start with her phone records," he said. "If she's been talking to someone, we'll find out who it is. And if she's meeting up with him, we'll catch her in the act." It felt strange, sitting there and discussing my wife like she was a suspect in some crime, but at the same time, it gave me a sense of purpose. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was doing something, taking control. Over the next few days, I stayed at the motel, waiting for updates from Chris. I avoided Emily's calls and texts, though it wasn't easy. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat, wondering if it was her. But I knew if I gave in, I'd only end up right back where I started. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Chris called. "We've got something," he said. I met him at his office, where he handed me a folder. Inside were photos, text message screenshots, and a detailed report. My hands shook as I flipped through the evidence. Emily hadn't just left the party with some random guy. She'd been seeing him for months. His name was Jared, and he wasn't just anyone. He was her coworker. The photos were the hardest to look at. There they were, walking hand in hand, laughing together, and worst of all, kissing in the parking lot of a restaurant. It felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a full-blown affair. Chris must have noticed the look on my face because he said, "I'm sorry, man. I know this isn't easy." I nodded, unable to speak. My mind was racing with questions. How could she do this to me? How long had she been lying? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do now? Chris offered to keep digging, but I told him it wasn't necessary. I had all the proof I needed. Now, it was up to me to decide what to do with it. That night, I sat alone in my motel room, staring at the photos spread out on the bed. Part of me wanted to confront Emily right then and there, to throw the evidence in her face and demand answers. But another part of me, maybe the smarter part, knew I needed to think this through. Whatever I did next, it had to count. As I sat there, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about Emily and Jared. It was about me reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. And I was going to do it on my terms. After staring at the photos for what felt like hours, I finally folded them back into the folder and set it aside. My mind was spinning with the possibilities of what to do next. Should I confront Emily directly? Should I call Jared and tell him to stay the hell away from my wife? Or should I just file for divorce and cut my losses without saying a word? I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me. Emily had already blindsided me with her betrayal, and I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. If I confronted her, I needed to do it with a clear head and on my terms. But how? The next day, I met up with Ryan at a small bar downtown. I hadn't told him everything Chris had uncovered, but I gave him the gist of it. Emily had been having an affair with a coworker, and I had the evidence to prove it. Ryan, ever the practical one, nodded thoughtfully as I laid it all out. "So, what's the plan?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to confront her and make her admit it, but another part of me just wants to walk away and never look back. Ryan took a sip of his beer. "Look, man, you need to think this through. If you confront her without a plan, she'll just twist it around and make you look like the bad guy. But if you play it smart, you can come out of this with your dignity intact and maybe even teach her a lesson." "Teach her a lesson?" I raised an eyebrow. He grinned. "Not in a vengeful way, but in a way that makes her realize she messed up. You deserve that much, don't you?" I nodded slowly, his words sinking in. Ryan was right. I needed to confront Emily, but I had to do it in a way that left no room for her lies or excuses. I needed to show her that I wasn't the gullible fool she clearly thought I was. By the time I left the bar that night, I had the beginnings of a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I decided to bide my time, gathering my thoughts and preparing myself for the confrontation. I knew Emily was already suspicious. My absence and silence had likely tipped her off. But I didn't care. Let her stew, let her wonder. She deserved to feel at least a fraction of the pain she caused me. The following week was a blur. I stayed at the motel, going through the motions of everyday life, while mentally preparing myself for what was to come. I called a lawyer to explore my options and made arrangements to have my belongings moved out of the house. I wasn't planning to stay married to Emily after this, but I wanted to make sure I had everything in order before pulling the trigger. Then, one night, I got a text from her. "Mike, I know you're upset, but can we please talk? I miss you." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Fine. Be home tomorrow at 7 p.m. We'll talk then." She replied almost immediately, flooding my phone with messages about how relieved she was and how much she loved me. I didn't respond. I had said everything I needed to say for now. The next evening, I pulled into the driveway of the house I once called home. It felt strange, standing on the front porch and unlocking the door, knowing this might be the last time I ever stepped foot inside. The living room looked the same, but it felt different, colder somehow. Maybe that was just me. Emily was already there, sitting on the couch with her hands clasped nervously in her lap. She looked up when I walked in, her face lighting up with a mix of relief and apprehension. "Mike," she said, standing up. "I'm so glad you're here. I've been so worried about you." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked past her and set the folder down on the coffee table. "Sit," I said, my voice steady. She hesitated, then obeyed, her eyes darting to the folder. "What's this? You tell me," I said, crossing my arms. Her hands trembled as she reached for the folder. She opened it and froze as the photos spilled out onto the table. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the rustling of paper. Then she looked up at me, her face pale. "Mike, I can explain." "No," I said sharply. "You don't get to explain. You've had weeks to come clean, and you didn't. So now I want you to listen. I know about Jared. I know about the lies. And I know you've been making a fool out of me for months." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't let them sway me. I was done falling for her crocodile tears. "I trusted you, Emily," I continued, my voice rising. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? By sneaking around with some guy from work and lying to my face." "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I laughed bitterly. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You've been seeing him for months, Emily. That's not a mistake, that's a choice." She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. "Mike, please. I'm sorry. I love you. It was a mistake, I swear. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this," I said, my voice cold. "And I don't believe for one second that you're sorry. You're just sorry you got caught." She broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I felt nothing. Not pity, not sympathy, not even anger. Just a deep, hollow emptiness. "I'm leaving," I said finally. "I'll have someone come by to get my things. Don't contact me again unless it's about the divorce." "Mike, wait," she cried, but I didn't stop. I walked out the door, closing it behind me without a second glance. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, and something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. The days following my final confrontation with Emily were some of the strangest and most exhausting of my life. I moved into a small studio apartment on the other side of town, a far cry from the comfortable home I had shared with her. It wasn't much, just a bed, a couch, and a tiny kitchen, but it was mine. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a space where I could breathe and think. I spent a lot of time reflecting on everything that had happened, the betrayal, the lies, the confrontation. It all played on a loop in my mind. Part of me wanted to call Emily and demand more answers, to ask her how she could have done this to me, but I knew that was a dead end. She had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. The first thing I did was hire a lawyer. I wanted to get the divorce process started as quickly as possible. Emily had already texted me a few times, pleading with me to come back, but I ignored her. I was done with the lies and manipulation. I didn't trust her, and I wasn't sure I ever would again. But even as I tried to move forward, there was a part of me that couldn't let go. I found myself scrolling through the photos from Chris's report late at night, replaying the images of Emily and Jared in my mind. It was like picking at a scab that wouldn't heal. I knew it wasn't healthy, but I couldn't help it. I needed to understand why this had happened, even if the answers wouldn't bring me peace. One night, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of wallowing in the past, I focused on the future. I made a list of all the things I wanted to do now that I was on my own. Simple things like going hiking or learning to cook. It was a small step, but it gave me something to look forward to. A week later, I got a call from Chris. He told me he had found more information about Jared, the guy Emily had been seeing. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I wanted to hear it, but curiosity got the better of me. "I found something you might want to know," Chris said. "It turns out Jared is married." The words hit me like a truck. "What? He's married?" "Yeah," Chris confirmed. "I did some digging, and he's been married for about 3 years. His wife's name is Rachel. I thought you might want to know in case you're planning to confront him." I wasn't sure what to do with that information. Part of me wanted to reach out to Rachel and tell her everything. She deserved to know the truth, just like I had. But another part of me hesitated. Was it my place to get involved in their marriage? Would it do more harm than good? I decided to sit on the information for a few days and focus on getting my own life in order. But as fate would have it, I didn't have to make the decision. Rachel found me first. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was sitting in my apartment, going through some old photos, when my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. "Hi, is this Mike? My name is Rachel. I think we need to talk." My heart raced as I stared at the screen. How had she found me, and what did she want to talk about? I typed out a reply, my hands shaking slightly. "Hi, Rachel. Yes, this is Mike. How did you get my number?" Her reply came almost immediately. "I found it in Jared's phone. I think my husband has been having an affair with your wife. Can we meet?" I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop later that afternoon. As I sat there waiting for her, my mind raced with questions. What was she like? Did she know everything? Or was she just beginning to piece it together like I had? When Rachel walked in, I recognized her instantly from the photos Chris had shown me. She was tall and elegant, with a calm, composed demeanor that made me feel like a nervous wreck in comparison. She spotted me and walked over, extending a hand. "Mike," she said. "I'm Rachel." We shook hands, and she sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she broke the silence. "I'm sorry to drop this on you," she said, "but I found some messages on Jared's phone that, well, they led me to you. I think he's been seeing your wife." I nodded slowly. "He has. I hired a private investigator, and I have proof." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't seem surprised. "I thought so," she said quietly. "I've had my suspicions for a while, but I didn't want to believe it. I guess I was hoping I was wrong." I pulled out the folder Chris had given me and slid it across the table. "This is everything I have," I said. "Photos, messages, the whole thing. I thought you should see it." Rachel hesitated for a moment before opening the folder. As she flipped through the pages, her face remained calm, but I could see the pain in her eyes. When she finally closed it, she took a deep breath and looked at me. "Thank you," she said. "I needed to see this." We spent the next hour talking, sharing our stories, and trying to make sense of what had happened. It was strange, sitting across from the wife of the man who had destroyed my marriage, but there was something comforting about it, too. We were both victims of the same betrayal, and for the first time, I didn't feel so alone. By the time we parted ways, I felt a strange sense of closure. I didn't know what Rachel planned to do next, and I didn't ask. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was someone taking back control of my life. After meeting Rachel, I felt a strange sense of validation. It wasn't just me. Jared's betrayal had rippled into her life just as much as Emily's actions had shattered mine. I went back to my apartment that evening feeling lighter, as though sharing the burden had lifted some of the weight off my shoulders. But Rachel's calm composure stayed with me, and I found myself wondering what her next move would be. She hadn't been emotional or angry, at least not outwardly, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet determination that made me think she wasn't the type to let things slide. Whatever she planned to do, I had a feeling it would be calculated and effective. A few days passed, and I went about my new routine. Work, the occasional hike, and quiet evenings spent trying to piece my life back together. Emily hadn't contacted me since our last interaction, and for that, I was grateful. I still hadn't filed for divorce, but I knew it was only a matter of time. I just needed to summon the energy to deal with the paperwork. Then, on a Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Mike, we need to talk. I think you'll want to hear this." My stomach tightened as I read the message. What now? I agreed to meet her the next day at the same coffee shop where we'd met before. When I arrived, Rachel was already there, sitting at the same table with a coffee in hand. This time, her expression was less poised. She looked resolute, like someone about to deliver a bombshell. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down. "No problem," I replied, though my voice betrayed my nervousness. "What's going on?" She slid her phone across the table. "I confronted Jared," she said, "and I recorded the whole thing." I stared at the phone, unsure if I wanted to press play, but curiosity won out. I hit play, and Jared's voice filled the air. "Rachel, it was just a mistake. It didn't mean anything. You've been seeing her for months," Rachel's voice replied, sharp and steady. "That's not a mistake. That's a choice." There was a pause, and then Jared sighed. "Fine. Yes, I've been seeing her. But it's not like her marriage is any better. Mike's a total pushover. She told me she's only staying with him because she feels sorry for him." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. My jaw tightened, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Rachel reached across the table, her hand resting on mine. "I'm sorry, Mike," she said softly, "but I thought you needed to know." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. "So that's what she's been telling him," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That she feels sorry for me?" Rachel nodded. "I know it's hard to hear, but I think it's important for you to know how they've been talking about you. You deserve better than this." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. For weeks, I had been consumed by anger and betrayal. But this was something else. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about how little respect Emily had for me, how she had reduced me to some pathetic figure in her twisted narrative. "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked after a moment. I shook my head. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm not going to let this define me. If she thinks I'm a pushover, she's about to find out just how wrong she is." Rachel smiled faintly, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. "Good," she said, "because I think it's time we both stop letting them control the narrative." Before we parted ways, Rachel handed me a USB drive. "This has the recording," she said. "Do with it what you will." I thanked her and left, my mind racing with possibilities. I didn't know what I was going to do with the recording yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done playing the victim. That evening, I went back to my apartment and poured myself a drink. I sat at the small dining table, staring at the USB drive in my hand. It felt like a symbol of everything I had lost and everything I still had the power to take back. The next day, I called my lawyer and set the divorce process in motion. I wasn't going to let Emily drag this out or manipulate me into staying. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. But even as I started to take control of my life, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Emily and Jared had underestimated me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was holding all the cards. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. After officially starting the divorce process, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't waiting for Emily to make a move or for Jared to mess up. I was taking back control, and it felt good. But as satisfying as it was to set my own terms, I knew I couldn't let this end quietly, not after everything they had done. I kept replaying Jared's words from Rachel's recording in my head. "Mike's a total pushover." The audacity of it burned like a hot coal in my chest. They thought I was weak, a joke. That was their mistake. With Rachel's permission, I decided to use the recording strategically. I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted accountability. They had turned my life upside down, and now it was time to let the truth come out. The first step was finding the right moment to confront Jared directly. I wanted to catch him off guard, to make him face the reality of his actions without the chance to spin more lies. With Chris's help, I learned Jared's usual routines, where he worked, where he went for lunch, and even where he spent his evenings. A few days later, I showed up at his office during his lunch break. It was a sleek corporate building downtown, the kind of place where everyone wore expensive suits and carried briefcases. Jared was sitting at a table in the lobby, scrolling through his phone with a smug expression that made my blood boil. I walked up to him, my heart pounding but my face calm. "Jared." He looked up, startled. "Mike," he said, clearly not expecting me. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Now." He glanced around nervously, probably worried someone might overhear. Sure, let's step outside." We walked out to a small courtyard behind the building, away from prying eyes. Jared leaned against the wall, trying to look casual, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "Look, man," he started. "If this is about Emily, save it." I cut him off, pulling out my phone. "I've already heard enough." I hit play on Rachel's recording, letting his own words echo in the quiet courtyard. As the recording played, his face went from smug to pale. When it ended, I tucked my phone back into my pocket and stared at him. "Well," I said, "anything you'd like to add?" Jared stammered, his confidence completely shattered. I didn't mean what?" I snapped. "Didn't mean to disrespect me? Didn't mean to lie to Rachel? Or didn't mean to get caught?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, he looked genuinely scared. "You think I'm a pushover?" I continued, stepping closer. "You think you can sneak around with my wife and trash my name without consequences? You don't know a damn thing about me, Jared, but you're about to find out." Before he could respond, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there speechless. It wasn't about intimidating him or making a scene. It was about making sure he understood that I wasn't going to roll over and let him and Emily get away with this. When I got back to my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Confronting Jared had been cathartic, but it wasn't enough. There was still unfinished business with Emily, and I wasn't about to let her off the hook. That evening, I sent her a text. "We need to talk. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. at the house." Her response came quickly. "Okay, I'll be there." The next day, I arrived early, wanting to prepare myself for whatever was to come. Emily showed up on time, looking nervous but trying to appear composed. She walked into the living room where I was waiting with the folder of evidence and my phone. "What's this about, Mike?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I didn't waste time. I laid the folder on the coffee table alongside my phone. "This is about accountability," I said. "For months, you've lied to me, disrespected me, and destroyed the life we built together. And now it's time for you to face the consequences." She glanced at the folder but didn't open it. "Mike, I've already told you I'm sorry. I made a mistake, but..." "Stop," I interrupted. "You didn't make a mistake, Emily. You made a series of choices, and I have no interest in hearing more excuses." Her face flushed, and for a moment she looked like she might argue, but then her shoulders slumped, and she sat down on the couch. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "I want you to sign the divorce papers," I said, pulling them out of my bag. "No fighting, no dragging this out. You don't deserve anything more from me, and you know it." She stared at the papers, her hands trembling. "And if I don't, then I make everything public," I said, my voice calm but firm. "The photos, the texts, the recording. Jared's wife already knows, so don't think you can hide this forever." Her eyes widened in shock. "You told Rachel?" "She found me," I corrected. "And unlike you, she was honest. She deserves better, just like I do." Emily looked down at the papers, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted it to end like this," she whispered. "Neither did I," said, standing up. "But you made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Without another word, I left the house, leaving her to face the reality of what she had done. As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase the pain, but it was a step forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could see a future beyond the betrayal. The weeks following my confrontation with Emily were both surreal and liberating. True to my word, I filed the divorce papers and left them in her hands. To my surprise, she didn't fight it. A few days later, my lawyer called to tell me she had signed everything. Just like that, 6 years of marriage were reduced to a stack of legal documents and a painful memory. But the end of my marriage wasn't the end of the story. If anything, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I had to figure out who I was without Emily and what kind of life I wanted to build moving forward. In the meantime, Rachel and I stayed in touch. She reached out to let me know that she had filed for divorce from Jared, and we exchanged updates on how things were progressing. It felt strange, bonding with the wife of the man who had helped destroy my marriage. But there was an unspoken understanding between us, a shared pain that neither of us had to explain. One afternoon, Rachel called me with unexpected news. "Mike," she said, her voice steady but tinged with excitement. "I thought you'd want to know. Jared quit his job." "What?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Why? Word got out," she explained. "I didn't even have to do anything. Someone leaked the recording. His coworkers heard it, and it spread like wildfire. He couldn't face the embarrassment, so he resigned." I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Jared, the man who thought I was a pushover, had been taken down by his own words. It wasn't revenge, it was karma. As for Emily, I hadn't heard from her since she signed the papers. I assumed she was trying to pick up the pieces of her life, just as I was. Part of me wondered if she regretted what she had done, but I didn't dwell on it. Her choices were her own, and I had no intention of letting her back into my life. With the divorce finalized and the dust beginning to settle, I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. I went hiking in places I'd always wanted to explore, took a cooking class just for the fun of it, and even reconnected with a few old friends I hadn't seen since college. It was strange, rediscovering the things that made me happy outside of a relationship, but it was also empowering. One evening, as I was unpacking some boxes in my apartment, I came across an old photo album. It was filled with pictures of Emily and me during the early days of our relationship, smiling, carefree, and full of hope. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, wondering how we had gone from that to where we were now. But then I closed the album and put it back in the box. The past was the past, and it didn't define my future. I had been betrayed, yes, but I had also survived, and that was something to be proud of. A few weeks later, Rachel and I met up for coffee. It wasn't the first time we had seen each other since everything happened, but this time felt different. We weren't meeting to commiserate or exchange updates. We were just two people moving forward from the wreckage of our lives. "How are you holding up?" I asked her as we sat by the window, watching the world go by. "Better," she said with a small smile. "It's been hard, but I think I'm finally starting to feel like myself again." "How about you?" I nodded. "Same. It's weird, isn't it? Starting over." "It is," she agreed. "But it's also kind of exciting, isn't it? Like we get a second chance to figure out what we really want." Her words stuck with me long after we parted ways. A second chance. That's what this was, not just for me, but for her, too. We had both been blindsided by betrayal, but we were still standing, and that in itself felt like a victory. In the end, Emily and Jared became nothing more than a painful chapter in my story, one that I had closed and moved on from. I didn't need revenge or validation from them. I had found my own closure, my own peace, and my own path forward. As I sat in my apartment that evening, looking out at the city lights, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for a future where I wasn't defined by what had happened to me, but by what I chose to do next. This was my life now, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was truly mine.